I am outraged, and you should be too after hearing about the case I'm going to talk to you about. This is the case of Lindsey Whiteside. This is out of Mississippi. I'm also going to be referring to the cases of Tom Keesee and Art Lucier because there are some similarities with their facts. So there is this amazing district attorney out of DeSoto County, Mississippi, named Matthew Barton. He's a hero. And the sheriff from that county, Thomas Tuggle, he's a hero as well. I'm going to play a short clip in a bit of the press conference that DA Barton gave. This was after the sentencing of Lindsey Whiteside. I'm going to give you some facts about this before we do that though. So Lindsey Whiteside, I think she's 26 now. And she was a youth pastor at a church called Get Well Church in Hernando, Mississippi. She was indicted by a state grand jury in December of 2024 with one count of felony sexual battery against a minor child by a person of trust or authority. So this act occurred between May 14, 2024 and November 6, 2024. And this state charge carries up to 30 years in prison. The victim was 14 or 15 years old at the time. Now, in that state, there is a statute that even though the age of consent is 16, if the offense was done by somebody in authority or a position of authority, that the victim could be 17. So that would be above the regular age of consent in that state. So from what DA Barton said, there were repeated or numerous acts of SA against the victim. So I am a bit curious as to why only one count was charged. I don't know the reason, but maybe someone out there does. And I would appreciate if anybody knows anything about this case, please share it in the comments, or if you would like to reach out to me personally, I'm going to leave my email in the description box. It's vjohnson@77alpha.com. So I really, really appreciate this DA. Not many DAs would just take center stage and do a press conference like he did after the sentencing. Whiteside, she was a youth leader. So there are similarities with Tom Keesee and Art Lucier. Tom Keesee was a youth leader at Faith Life Church, and you know his charges, you know his parents backing him. Team Tom bracelets, remember that? Meanwhile, Tom Keesee has been charged with 32 felony counts of SA against 4 different victims under the age of 13. Art Lucier, he has been alleged to have SA'd minor children who are foster kids. Now, in Art Lucier's case, it's a civil case, it's not a criminal case. And yet he's got his board and others, his wolf pack surrounding him and propping him up and backing him. And you can watch Laura Lynn and Brother John Elving, Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson and Brother John Elving, they have done extensive videos about him because they're in Canada and they know him. Laura Lynn, that was her pastor for a little while. So the similarity, these victims are under the authority of these perpetrators. And some DAs, you know, after they finish with a case, and if you're new here, I used to be a sex crimes prosecutor in Detroit. And yes, you have ups and downs, you have wins and you have losses. And if you're in a very busy office like I was, you have to move on to the next one. There were times that I was finishing up a jury trial and I couldn't babysit the jury, so to speak. I'd have to have somebody else wait for the verdict because I'd have to start another case on another floor and start picking another jury. So not all offices are the same. Based upon what DA Barton shared, it sounds like they have a pretty small office. I think he said they have maybe 9 attorneys. That's small. Big cities, there's, you know, usually maybe even 100. I think that was the case where I worked. I don't even know. It was just a very large office, and I didn't even know all the prosecutors there. So if you're interested in this case that I'm about to talk to you about, Lindsey Whiteside, Julie Roys has 2 articles on it. They both came out in October. So let me give you some of these facts. In November of 2024, there were accusations that were made to DeSoto County Sheriff's Department, and they investigated those accusations right away, and they had an indictment within a month. Contrast Tom Keesee. How long did it take for that? And DA Barton said that this was the strongest case he could have ever hoped for. 64,000 pages of text messages between Whiteside and the victim. And there were also letters that Whiteside wrote to the victim on the letterhead of Getwell. I'm thinking Gateway with Robert Morris. Getwell Church. It's a weird name. He said that this case had overwhelming evidence that proved Whiteside's guilt. Well, let's contrast that to Tom Keesee. Tom Keesee has 4 victims. There's no defense of some other dude did it. They're all pointing to Tom Keesee. One of them is his sister. And I've shared this before. You've heard it 100 times. It's very unusual to have that many people pointing to the same person. There's also witnesses that will testify that Tom himself admitted to some of the acts. And there are witnesses that will testify that some of these victims came out and told them as well. So there's corroborating statements there. One could argue that's overwhelming evidence of Tom's guilt, yet he has not pled guilty. He plans on going to trial. So she's indicted Lindsey Whiteside. She's indicted in December of 2024. She's a youth pastor. Recently, on October 13th, 2025, she pled guilty, straight up, meaning she didn't have any offer from the state. The state was looking for 30 years. No plea deal. On that same day, the judge immediately sentenced her, and the DA requested the 30 years, which was the maximum sentence. And the DA was extremely disappointed because instead of giving her 30 years, what do you think the judge did? Did he give her 20 years, 15 years, 10 years? No. He gave her 3 years house arrest, followed by 7 years probation, and that she must register as an SO. That's the sentence that the judge gave her. And so the DA says this sentence is an absolute abomination of justice. I'd agree. He said it's not right. It is everything that is wrong. It is the reason why people question whether our institutions actually serve victims. Have you been questioning that? With all the exposure videos, that is a reasonable question, whether our institutions actually serve victims. He says it sends the wrong message. It is very difficult for a victim of a crime, especially a child, to come forward and to have her voice silenced by a horrible sentence. This is a miscarriage of justice. He said it makes it even more difficult for future victims to want to come out and be brave enough to be heard. That's what happens. That's the reality. And it just didn't start now. You would think in 2025 that things would be a bit different, but unfortunately they're not. So I have a clip, a short clip. This clip is about 24, the whole video is about 24 minutes long. I'm going to link that in the description so you can watch the whole thing. But I'm just going to share a small little clip of that.
Repeated sexual abuse of a child. Procedurally, the way we got here is in November of 2024, these accusations were disclosed to the Sheriff's Department here in DeSoto County They were investigated right away. Our office was able to secure an indictment in less than a month after the investigation started. The case that was put together was very, very good. Maybe the strongest you could hope for in a situation like this. We had 64,000 pages of printed out text messages. We had handwritten letters that were on church stationery. We had just a mountain of evidence. It was overwhelming proof. There was no way Lindsey Whiteside would have ever been able to get out from under the pile of evidence. So she did ultimately plead guilty, knowing that a trial would be it would not be a worthwhile endeavor. So she pled guilty really out of necessity. She had no chance of going to trial. We did that earlier today. It was immediately followed by a sentencing hearing. We, as the state of Mississippi, and on behalf of the victims, requested the maximum sentence, which is 30 years. And I don't mind just saying it frankly. I'm extremely disappointed. The sentence ended up being 3 years of house arrest, followed by 7 years of post-release supervision, for a total of 10 years of supervision. This sentence is an absolute abomination of justice. It is not right. It is everything is wrong. This is the reason why people question whether our institutions actually serve victims. This is the wrong message. It is very, very difficult for a victim of a crime, especially a child, to come forward and then to have her voice silenced by a horrible, horrible sentence, miscarriage of justice. Makes it even more difficult for future victims to want to come forward and be brave. I want to commend the victim in this case and her family. I've rarely seen such a display
So in
of
this
courage
video, it
and
goes
faith.
on, and DA Barton says that Lindsey Whiteside should never be trusted. He talks about her being trusted with children, and that she betrayed that trust, and that she used the gospel of Jesus as a weapon. Isn't that what we see in all of these cases? It's exactly
has now
what's
been
happening
found guilty of
with Art
sexual
Lucier,
battery
with
while
Michael
in a position
Brown,
of
with
trust
Mike
and authority
Bickle.
over a minor child.
You get the pedophile sympathizers to speak up, and they're going to cry out repentance, mercy, that we're so mean because we're crying out for justice.
I will warn audiences, subject
really
matter may not be
ridiculous.
suitable for everybody.
It lacks understanding and empathy.
But today we're
Yet
announcing
they're
the
crying out
conviction
for
of Lindsey
empathy and mercy,
Whiteside,
which makes
who
absolutely no sense.
has now
Their
been found
mercy
guilty
and empathy is for
sexual
the
battery while in a
perpetrator.
position of trust and authority over a minor child. This stems from her time as a youth pastor
So,
at Get Well Baptist Church in
The
Hernando.
DA talked about
the victim in this case
what
was
Whiteside did with this
a
victim.
member of that youth group,
There's
and
grooming.
that is what created
Talked
the
about the
opportunity for
vulnerabilities
this
of a child who
repeated
is struggling.
sexual abuse of a child.
And that Whiteside manipulated her, as well as the victim's family. We've seen that with Mike Bickle. You know, if this case involved a male defendant, and the DA talked about this, could
Good
we have seen a
evening.
different
This is
outcome?
Ralph. I'm Mocha.
DA Barton
Welcome. You
said
must be curious
he
about
would
the
have
show.
likely seen
And
20
faith
years
And
with similar facts with a male
disclosed
defendant.
to the
And that's a very interesting point, because Lindsey Whiteside is a young, white, blonde female. And you'll hear in a little bit, I'm going to talk about it. The judge talks about her appearance, not in the way I just said, but you can gather what he meant. Did that come into play? That's a question I have. And you should too. People in that community are outraged, and they should be. The DA said, DA Barton, he said, it's high time for people to pay attention to what goes on in our court systems, because this is an absolute travesty and it's not right. He says that several times. It's not right. I would agree. And you know, I've said this before on my channel. If you have time, or if you're retired, there are state courts, federal courts in your area that you can go and sit in and watch the proceedings. It will absolutely give you not only an education, but you'll see what's really going on in your community. You should do that. Everybody should do that. People like to get out of jury duty, but, you know, it's very eye-opening. If you have never been a part of any type of, a law firm, the justice system of any type, law enforcement, you should at least spend a day in a court. And the DA says, I am ashamed to be associated with a system that has performed so poorly in this matter. I feel for him. And then there's a victim statement that was made by a family member. Her name is Pam Pegram. And she shared about what the victim went through and pointed out that Whiteside was 9 years older than the victim, supposed to be her spiritual mentor, and that Whiteside abused her position as trust, and that the victim looked up to her as a youth pastor. She called it vile, evil, and shocking, and said, how can anyone do things like this and then show up to preach at church or show up to a Bible study or lead a youth event? But these are things that Whiteside did after the abuse. And then she goes on and says, and having read the comments and people who didn't know the facts, that this only deepened the pain. And that is such an unfortunate but clearly true similarity with these cases that I cover, that other podcasters cover. Tom Keesee, Art Lucier, Mike Bickle. When people don't know what happened to those victims and they make statements, and even ones that are absolutely ridiculous when you consider the law. If it is a child cannot consent. But yet, for whatever reason, people will actually make comments as if the child was asking for it. I've heard it all. And if you're new here, I was a prosecutor in Detroit. I don't know if I said that, but I prosecuted sex crimes against children. And I've heard all kinds of defenses. You can't argue that the child consented. Ever. It's a statutory R word case. It's so disturbing how people rally behind these pedophiles. And that's exactly what's going on here with Lindsey Whiteside. If nothing else, the biggest similarity is the fact that Lindsey Whiteside is being surrounded by, propped up, encouraged, and just defended by people in her community, just like Tom Keesee, just like Art Lucier, just like Michael Brown, just like Mike Bickle. It's really sickening. There should be a special word for it. And so this family member who's giving the victim statement, she says, no adult should ever have sexual contact with a child. Well, that's a statement that's plainly obvious. The fact that she has to make that statement is disturbing. And it gives us the temperature of what's happening today. For her to say no adult should ever have sexual contact with a child. Disturbing that she would have to say that. But yet here we are in 2025. She said, when you support the offender, you re-victimize the victim, and that this is why victims don't come forward. This is true. So we've talked about this. Others have talked about this. If you're on the side of victims, if you're outraged by all of this, it's bad enough that the victim went through the abuse, but you re-victimize them by questioning things. by supporting the offender. Number one, children aren't dumb. They know what's going on. So you have layers upon layers of issues as to why they don't come forward. They don't believe that they're going to be believed. And then the reality is cases like this, perhaps they've seen it in social media. Maybe that's why they don't come forward. Think about the Cindy Clemenshire case. To this day, people are still continuing to go after her. It's absolutely sickening. And the DA said he was so disturbed by the amount of pedophile sympathizers. I appreciate that, because I know I've used that word here before. Sympathizers. That's what they are. They sympathize with the perpetrator. And he talked about one of them. There were several of them in the community, these pedophile sympathizers, because Whiteside is a pedophile. She admitted it. She pled guilty in court. And he talks about Michelle Henley, an elected member of their school board, and that the victim was a student at one of the schools that Michelle Henley governed. And she wrote a letter in support of Whiteside and even testified in court, I believe. I'm not quite sure, but I think she did. But I remember seeing the letter attesting to Whiteside's good character. And DA Barton, he sent Michelle Henley a letter demanding her resignation. How many DAs do you know would go that extra mile and do that? And this is after the case is done. He can't do anything. The case has been sentenced. And he went ahead and wrote a letter demanding her resignation because he cares about the community. He cares about his job as a prosecutor, protecting people in the community. He didn't have to, but he's a hero because he chose to do that. And this is really interesting what he said. You know, I don't know if he'll ever see this video. I don't know if anybody in that community will. I don't know if that sheriff will, or if they even watch any videos that people do on exposure channels like mine. But this is exactly what we talk about. He said, I don't care how much good you've done in the world, but then they follow up and they commit a repeated essay against a child. Exactly. Exactly. Because you've got people claiming, oh, but so-and-so, they brought so many people to the Lord. And what did you do, victim? We hear that over and over again, as if the fact that they brought somebody to the Lord, if they ever even did, negates what they did. It's a comparison that it's absolutely twisted and bizarre. It doesn't even make any sense. It defies logic. But I would submit that these people who talk like that, they defy logic. They don't have the capacity to think critically, to reason, and they themselves are dangers to society. And the DA says, justice has not been served with that sentence. So the DA talked about the judge and said that the judge said, this is from the bench, the judge said this on record from the bench at the hearing. This is where Lindsey Whiteside pled guilty and was sentenced. And the judge said, prison is a place for people we are afraid of. And DA Barton said, isn't prison a place for people who commit crimes, regardless of what they look like? So if the offender looked different, I'm curious to hear what the judge would say. And really curious that the judge would even say that. Out of the mouth, the heart speaks. He could have kept that thought to himself. But we got a glimpse into it. This essay, it was done on church trips. They would be on a bus and they would even go out of state. And Whiteside would put a blanket over the victim and perform the essay. And this was in the presence of other church leadership and other children who were on the bus. And the DA talked about the great divide, talking about people in Get Well Church. I think they do need to get well. Something's amiss. Get Well Church leaders and members who support Whiteside. Now, I don't know if there are any that didn't. I would suppose there would be, but we see it all the time. Tom Keesee, Faith Life Church. There was a mass exodus, but there's still people that go there. Why? And Art Lucier is back in the pulpit. And Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson recently said on one of her videos that there are 3 more victims that have recently come out against him. But yet, Dean Briggs is calling him back. Come forth, Art Lucier. These people are sympathizers of abusers. And you have to ask yourself why that is so. Why is this happening? And so he talks about the pedophile sympathizers, that there's defendants, family, in her family, there are lifelong educators in that community working in the school system, and that they called on those people to write letters of support for Whiteside. Next, he talked about the judge. I bet you want to know who this is. His name is Andrew Howarth, Howorth. And the DA talked about there being 2 prior judges, Judge Wilson and Judge Chatham, and that they were the only 2 judges at the time in that district at the time that Whiteside was indicted. And Judge Wilson and Judge Chatham both recused themselves. Why? Well, they said that they had personal relationships with the defendant's family or shared community interest, which was the church. Sound familiar? Drenda Keesee, the Knox County Commissioner. Knox County couldn't investigate it. Kicked it to the AG's office, where David Yost is the AG, where it sat. And then he announces that his office can't investigate either, the second recusal, because he's friends with Gary and Drenda Keesee. 2 and 2. 2 judges recused themselves in Whiteside. 2 investigating offices recused themselves with Tom Keesee. And this is an interesting statement. So DA Barton said, because both judges recused themselves, we were left with liberal judge from Oxford who thinks child predators shouldn't go to prison. Let me say that again. He said that they were left, after those 2 judges recused themselves, they were left with a liberal judge from a different county, Oxford, who thinks that child predators shouldn't go to prison. Not only that, on his watch, they don't. Because he's not scared of them. When I first moved to Florida, there was a case in Tampa, and it was a woman. She was probably in her 20s. She was a teacher. She was accused of SA of a male student, and she was very pretty, and she pled guilty to the judge, and she got no jail time. Her attorney argued to the judge that she was too pretty for jail. I wonder what's going on with the Whiteside case. Here we have a judge, this is the DA talking, who acknowledged great harm was done to the victim, but did nothing about it. And he said, I think the broader problem is the implication that a sentence like this has on the community. 100%. It's what we're seeing time after time after time again. And if we don't talk about it, it will continue. This isn't gossip. If you think this is gossip, then you need to picket and petition every single school in your area, every single courthouse in your area, because they're talking about things like that there. Don't come onto my channel and accuse me of gossiping. I'm going to continue to talk about these things that need to be talked about. And you're all welcome to have comments here, because this is a safe place for victims and whistleblowers. And I won't tolerate anybody demeaning any whistleblowers or victims on this channel. So he says that, how are you going to trust a system that lays down for a perpetrator like this? Lays down. Not even a slap on the wrist. Not even a day in jail. Not even a day. And this is really, really interesting. One of the media people in the audience at the press conference said this. I'm going to quote it. He's talking about the judge. He's saying to the DA, I heard him say that prisons are for people that scare us. He literally said that from the bench. This woman Whiteside doesn't scare him. That kind of scares me. Scares me as well. And it should scare you. You should be outraged. If you're in that community, you should be scared that a judge who says that from the bench is seated on a bench hearing cases. This is why your vote matters. People in that community, you can vote. I guess he's in Oxford County. That should scare you. It scared the media guy. It should scare us all. People he deems that doesn't scare him, shouldn't go to prison. Well, I'll tell you what. People like Lindsey Whiteside should scare all of us because of that mask. If you fall for that, if you're looking at the outside, this is what we do, right? We send our kids to the church, let them deal with it. We trust them. You can't do that. And it's not like it's new today. You just can't do that. You need to vet. You need to figure out who you can trust. You need to be involved. And if you're going by appearance, well, aren't we told that Satan is beautiful? Why would we ever go by an appearance to determine who we're going to trust? Has that ever gotten you anywhere? Can't you come up with probably 100 instances where somebody you thought, because of their smooth words, or they looked good, or they were in a position of authority, and so I trusted them, and it didn't end up very well? But this judge thinks that she should not go to prison because her appearance doesn't scare him. Let that sink in. So then the DA says he plans on taking his case file and transcripts to the federal prosecutors and let them know what a horrible miscarriage of justice this was, and see if they would charge. And somebody asks him what he would say to Whiteside if he could, and he kind of pauses. And he said that he thinks that she's a narcissist. She's a manipulative person, and there's probably nothing that I could say to her that would register with her. Probably not. He said that she was so self-absorbed, and when she was speaking on her own behalf, she was making excuses for herself and downplaying what she did. He talked about her as being a predator, which she is, and that she will not be remembered for her family legacy, which I guess there is one, but rather she will be remembered for what she is, a predator. And the DA said that he was worried for people who are not as guarded as he is, and that he sees this every day, and that most people don't. That's right. And that's why I would encourage you all, if you can, Go sit in courtrooms. Get an education. See what's really going on out there. You're not going to just see it just by watching court TV. You have to watch what's going on every day, because that's just one case on court TV. If you go sit in a courtroom for a day, you might see a docket that has, I don't know, depending on maybe 10, even 50 cases that come up, and you might hear some stuff, you might hear a hearing, whatever, maybe even a trial. That could take a few days. It is well worth it to see what's actually going on in your community. So after this, DA Barton, I did do some research on this case. Matter of fact, I've known about wanting to do this coverage for over a week, but I just didn't have chance, and I had to process like I like to do and go over some things, but there are things that I'm still missing, and maybe those of you out there that are watching can fill in the gaps. But he has challenged the sentence. If you watch what I'm linking in the description box, he says that he wasn't going to do anything because there really wasn't any recourse, but it appears that perhaps maybe they did some further research and found that it is illegal in Mississippi for someone who has been charged with that law, where they've been entrusted as a authority figure. They are not eligible for house arrest. So that would make it even worse if they got rid of that, and then she's just under probation and can basically do whatever. But let's see what happens. I don't know where they're appealing it to. I've tried looking it up and I couldn't find anything, but maybe I will after, and I'll talk about it in another video. So then, because of that challenge, Judge Andrew Howarth recused himself, stating he did so due to media pressure and criticism from the DA's office. Then the DeSoto County Sheriff held a press conference after he worked with the federal prosecutor in getting charges.
Lucier with United States Marshal Service just arrested Lindsey Whiteside on federal charges of transporting a minor across state lines for the purpose of engaging in sexual activity. This arrest is a result of a collaborative investigation involving our office and the United States Attorney's Office. Together, we presented a thorough and compelling case to a federal grand jury. They subsequently returned an indictment against Ms. Whiteside.
So now Whiteside has been federally indicted. She has been charged with 2 counts of transporting a minor across state lines for SA, and 1 count of coercion and enticement of a child. From what I could find, these charges are punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison, and her federal trial is scheduled for February 9, 2026. She was given a bond initially of $60,000 plus house arrest, but I found an article talking about how it was revoked. So this is what the article talked about, that they referred to Whiteside as a former DeSoto County youth pastor and basketball coach, and that she had been out of jail since October 31st and living at her mother's house after federal magistrate Judge Jane Verdon ruled to allow house incarceration as she awaited for federal trial. However, Judge Brown stated that she weighed a few things differently when making her ruling, which included Whiteside's previous bond conditions, her GPS monitoring, and the defense's downplay of the relationship between Whiteside and the then 16-year-old victim. Now, this math is not mathing for me. If somebody can help me out, please do in the comments. The victim has been referenced as 14 years old, 15 years old, and 16 years old, but the period of time is only about 6 months of the act. And it could be that the child was SA'd even earlier, but they only charged for a period of time. That could have happened. But remember, the act occurred between May and November of 2024. So add to that, we know that the victim is now 18. So I just don't understand that. So maybe somebody can help out. So in any event, so Whiteside goes into federal court on that day. This was just a couple weeks ago. She goes in with her family, goes in with her attorney, but she doesn't leave with them because then she's placed into custody with the U.S. Marshals, and she's in jail right now. So she pled not guilty. She's going to have a trial. But remember, it's the same evidence. Remember what DA Barton said. He said that this was overwhelming evidence. That evidence doesn't change. Just like the evidence doesn't change in Tom Keesee. Just because you got in a continuance, and which doesn't even make sense with that judge. That judge allowed Tom Keesee a reduced bond when there was no change of circumstances. All he had was his attorney coming in there and saying, oh, there's this recording, an email, a phone call between the victims and an allegation that they were conspiring. And that's all it took for that judge to decide to substantially lower that bond. You guys, it's time to wake up. Just like DA Barton said, he made the statement just in passing. This is stuff he sees. I've seen it as a prosecutor. If you want to see what's out there, you have to see what's out in the community by going to the court and seeing what's happening in the court system. That's the only way you're going to know. I mean, you can read about it, you can watch videos, but it's very different if you go and look and see. It really is. So her attorney says that, this is the defense attorney, arguing for a bond and making these ridiculous state arguments that the relationship between Whiteside and the teenage victim was consensual. I'm sure this really pissed off the judge, claiming that she wasn't predatory, not a danger to society. Well, I would say she is. Absolutely. And he claims what was done to one was done to the other. And that's an allegation that, okay, if you know what that means, you know what that means. But let me just give you this hypothetical, because this is how I would charge cases. I've had them many times. When there's a perpetrator, the perpetrator can certainly perform an essay on the victim. But if the perpetrator gets the victim to perform the essay on him or her, it's still a crime. So the fact that what was done to one was done to the other, this defense attorney, you still have to have a basis that it's consensual, and you don't have that when you have a statutory crime like this. Why defense attorneys are allowed to even argue that is beyond me. It's 2025. It's unbelievable to me that they're even allowed to argue that, because it's a non-factor. It doesn't make a bit of sense to argue that. I think that they look ridiculous arguing that, but yet here we are. And during the recess before the judge ruled, the mother of the victim told Action News 5, a minor cannot consent. So this non-lawyer knows the law, but apparently the defense attorney doesn't want to and doesn't care. And so I'm very pleased that the judge, when she went on the bench, she said she was troubled by the defense's reference that this was a sexual dating relationship. And we should be too. We should be absolutely outraged by this. We're not going to stop. I'm not going to stop talking about this stuff. We have to be made aware of this if we want to see change. It really starts with educating yourself. If you don't know what's out there, how can you protect yourself? How can you protect your family? How can you knowingly vote for judges in your community? Because those elections come up and you see their names on the ballot and you don't know who they are. Well, if you go into court and watch them, you'll know who they are and what they're about. And this is absolutely reprehensible to me, that the judge made that statement in that state court saying that Lindsey Whiteside was not essentially a scary person to him. Now, how much of her appearance played a role in that sentence, we may never know. But I would be glad to do an update on this case once there's any further information. And if you want to reach out to me, if you know have personal knowledge about this case, if you're in the community, I'll leave my email. It's vjohnson@77alpha.com. I'll link the video of the DA in there as well. And I look forward to hearing what you all have to say in the comments. See you soon.